Good afternoon, everybody. There's still some seats down front. This isn't church. Y'all can come down front if you want. Thanks for having me over here. It's great to be back at the Foreign Press Center. I appreciate your hospitality and giving me a chance to do this. I do want to say a couple of things right up front, and then we'll obviously get to whatever's on your minds. With respect to our counter-Daesh efforts, in fact, the coalition's counter-Daesh efforts, I want to note that the United States welcomes the vote by the Danish Parliament yesterday and the announcement by the United Arab Emirates also yesterday to expand their contributions to the coalition to counter ISIL. Denmark's vote to increase authorized personnel on the ground and the redeployment of F-16 fighter aircraft for operations in both Iraq and in Syria will complement their existing contributions to the coalition, the contributions that we remain grateful for, and obviously this will be a significant addition to those efforts and to the coalition work to degrade and defeat Daesh. Also yesterday, as I said, the United Arab Emirates announced a $10 million contribution to the UNDP's funding facility for immediate stabilization to help accelerate the rehabilitation of civic infrastructure and community development initiatives in areas newly liberated from Daesh. As part of Denmark's vote, they also committed to strengthening civilian efforts by increasing support for stabilization efforts in Iraq and in Syria to counter Daesh and their propaganda. We appreciate these additional steps that will help ensure that the coalition continues to seize the momentum and sustain the momentum that we know we have gained against Daesh. Defeating Daesh is a top priority for the United States as well as all the coalition partners, and we're going to continue to work with our coalition partners, including Denmark, of course, and the United Arab Emirates, and so many others across the international community as we ultimately degrade and defeat this terrible group. I also want to note that the Secretary made a call this morning to Foreign Minister Kishida of Japan to express our condolences for the loss of life, the devastation, the destruction caused by recent earthquakes there in southern Japan. He also reiterated our commitment, the United States' commitment, to continue to support the Japanese government's relief efforts. And I think, as you know, right now that support is largely in the form of air support as they survey the damage and continue to look and to care for those who have been affected. I don't know of any additional requests right now by the Japanese government, but the Secretary said that obviously we would seriously consider any future requests by the Japanese government for support. And then just a note on his travel. As I think you know, he landed in Riyadh today to participate in the GCC summit accompanying President Obama. But he will, returning from Riyadh, he will go to New York on Friday, where he will represent the United States at the signing of the Paris Climate Agreement. And as I think you know, this is a historic climate agreement reached in Paris last December by the 196 parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The signing ceremony will be hosted by the UN and will be held at the UN headquarters. He will also be participating with representatives as well from a number of other nations that are also committing, as the United States, China, and others have, to join this agreement this year. The Secretary will have bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the signing ceremony, and we'll have a better sense and be able to announce specifically who those bilateral meetings are going to be with. Now, I will say that, having said that, I mean, the Secretary did note that he intends to meet again with Foreign Minister Zarif of Iran on Friday. As you know, he met with the Foreign Minister yesterday in New York, and he expressed his interest and intention to meet with him again on Friday. So, we have every expectation that that meeting will still happen. He will have other bilateral discussions, and again, we'll have a better schedule of that tomorrow, and certainly we'll have an opportunity to read those out to you as they occur on Friday. So with that, I'm going to stop. Now, are there rules here about who I have to call on first, or I can just go wherever I want, right? Oh, no, you go ahead. You go ahead, you first. We'll start because you're right in the middle, and we'll start with you.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I have a question regarding Taiwan, because several days ago, several Taiwanese people was sent by Kenya government to mainland China, and today the Taiwanese delegate arrived at Beijing to discuss this case with Beijing. And several days ago, the spokesperson of State Department said, you are watching the case carefully, and we will get to know the detail of the case. So I'm wondering how's everything's going on right now, and what's your position on this case? Because some of the people have the U.S. citizenship.
Yeah. Right. I appreciate the question. You're right. We are aware of reports that residents of Taiwan have been involuntarily deported from Kenya to China, and we are closely following the issue. We encourage Beijing to engage with Taipei to resolve this issue on the basis of dignity and respect. But again, we're watching this closely. I don't have further comment at this time. Yeah, go ahead. I'll go around, I promise. I'm not just going to stay up here.
Thank you, John. My name is Xue Jiao from China Central Television. I'm going to follow on the climate change deal. The United States and China will sign Paris climate deal this week. And how do you see China's involvement or leadership in the whole process? And what kind of role does climate change cooperation play in U.S.-China relations in future? Thank you.
It's a great question. China has been very, very cooperative in terms of getting us to the Paris Agreement. And I think you heard Secretary Kerry speak about their leadership role in Paris in December in terms of helping marshal those 196 countries and getting that agreement done. And I think you've also, I'm sure, aware that China also intends to sign on Friday and to join. Formally join. As you know, there's a difference between signing on Friday and then the actual act of joining. They're two separate, distinct processes, but the Chinese have stated their intention to join as well this year. So we welcome that news. We're grateful for the leadership that they have shown, the stewardship that they're showing over, demonstrating on this issue. You know, it is. There are plenty of issues where obviously we don't see eye to eye with China on, but the Secretary firmly believes that climate is one of them that we not only can but we should, as large developed nations as the United States and China are, with global responsibilities which we both share around the world. This is one issue that is important not just for our individual futures as nations, but for truly the global future and the future of nations in the regions in which we are so heavily engaged. So we look forward. The Secretary looks forward to seeing his counterpart and China's representative in New York on Friday, and to having both our nations sign on the dotted line, as it were, and to move forward. Yep. I'm gonna go back here, and then I'm gonna go to New York. Ma'am, you wait right back there. Yeah. We've got plenty of time, guys. We'll get around, I promise.
Okay, thank you. This is Madeline News Agency. The U.S. administration has been underlining the efforts in stepping up the fight against ISIL and stressing more than once that it needs more contribution from partners. What exactly are you looking for at the moment, and what are you looking for from Europe, countries like Italy, for example, or Great Britain, France, Germany? Thank you.
It's a great question. I mean, so let me start a little bit broad, and then we'll kind of work down. I mean, there are 66 nations in the coalition to defeat Daesh. That's significant. Afghanistan is the most recent one to join. And they face a very real threat there in Afghanistan from Daesh. So there are already 66 nations at this. And just in my opening comments, I talked about one European nation that has increased their efforts. And the British have, and we talked about that not long ago. We're grateful for every contribution by every nation that's participating in the coalition. It is a coalition of the willing, which means every nation involved has to be willing to contribute in ways that they see fit, and that their government and that their people will support. So we haven't gotten into the business, and I don't suspect we will, of of dictating, or demanding what we want individual countries to contribute. We're grateful for what they can and what they do contribute. And when they are willing to increase their efforts, as Denmark and the UAE were just yesterday, well, we're grateful for that too. And that's why we think it's important to say so. Because we, the United States, are increasing and intensifying our efforts against Daesh. And I think you may have seen, if you haven't, certainly our Defense Secretary Ash Carter is in the region, and announced some intensification efforts of our own from a military perspective. Not everything we do is militarily focused against Daesh, but a lot is, and he announced some steps that we were taking to intensify our efforts. So we want others to also look for opportunities, again, that are appropriate for them and their circumstances to intensify their efforts. But I think more specifically, over 30 nations from Europe are part of the coalition, and many of them play very key roles in the global effort and have all contributed in various ways to make up what is a comprehensive strategy against Daesh along different lines of effort. Not every nation in the coalition contributes forces or aircraft or advisors, but that doesn't mean that those contributions aren't welcome or are not important. Some are providing training and equipment, some including European nations, which are very good at police and constabulatory efforts, are working hard to train Iraqi police, which are very key to the stabilization efforts that need to occur in Iraq. I would also note that, and again, this gets outside the military lane, but it's also really important. A number of nations have enacted laws to create greater obstacles for foreign terrorist fighters, for the flow of foreign fighters traveling into Iraq and Syria, which have led to significant arrests as well as prosecutions of foreign terrorist fighters or aspirants over the last several months. And of course, many countries, including some European countries, are providing vital humanitarian assistance, and a number of them have made significant contributions to the UN Fund for Immediate Stabilization in Iraq, which is, again, the one I cited at the outset that the UAE has just announced contributions to. So, again, that's a long answer, but there's lots of ways that countries can contribute. There's lots of ways that they already are. Again, we're not in the business of dictating changes to their contributions, but we welcome efforts by all nations to intensify those efforts. Let me go to New York, and we'll come back here to the room.
Thank you. Dimitris Sultogiannis with Star Channel, Greece. On Monday, the president will meet with Angela Merkel, Francois Hollande, David Cameron, Matteo Renzi. Will the Greek economy and the refugee crisis be on the agenda, and is the U.S. concerned for an economic spillover, especially now, prior to the June referendum in the UK for Brexit?
Well, I'm probably not going to completely satisfy it, because I make it a habit not to speak for President Obama or his schedule. So I would let the White House speak for the content and the issues that the president will raise in those meetings. I wouldn't want to get ahead of that. But clearly, look, more broadly speaking, there is a wide array of issues that we're going to continue to engage with our European partners on, and clearly, Secretary Kerry, who routinely stays in contact with his European counterparts, routinely brings up the issues of foreign terrorist fighters, the issues, the refugee crisis, which we know is putting a strain on so many European nations, and both from a security perspective and from an economic perspective. That is why, and if you don't mind me just kind of pivoting to this, that is why the Secretary is working so hard on trying to get a political solution in Syria, because that's the best way to provide a home for these so many refugees, and so many of them are from Syria. Not all, of course, but so many. That's why they're leaving. That's why they're making these dangerous journeys. So we want to make sure that they have a home to go back to, one that's safe and secure, whole, unified, non-sectarian, and that's again why we're so focused on on trying to reach a political solution in Syria. It's why these talks in Geneva, which I understand have now paused again, but that's why that process is so important to the United States and to Secretary Kerry. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. Dmitry Kirsanov of TASS. This might sound a bit out of the blue, but it's a softball question, I promise, on U.S.-Russian relations.
Well, that's a heck of a wind-up.
Just trying to build up the excitement.
Yeah, well, you've done it.
Listen, we witnessed lately, I mean, within a time frame of last several months, how the secretary went to Moscow, how almost immediately after that, Undersecretary Shannon went, and there was never any prior announcement made here about those high-ranking officials visiting Russia. Is there anything like that in the cards now to follow up on those visits? And maybe you expect some of the high-ranking Russian visitors here?
Is the question that we didn't announce ahead of time?
The question is, can we expect any follow-up visits to Moscow by the high-ranking State Department officials to follow up on the secretary's
On the ones that
trip
have
to
already
Moscow?
happened.
Yeah. And
I don't have any follow-on visits to announce today, and as you know, when we always do announce high-level travel anywhere to anywhere, except for areas where, for security purposes, it's not wise to pre-announce, but we typically do. I don't have any follow-on visits specifically to announce or discuss today, but I certainly couldn't speak for travel here by Russian authorities. They would have to obviously speak for their travel plans. What I can tell you is just sort of two things. One, the Secretary felt it was important to visit and felt that the discussions there were productive, constructive, helpful in terms of trying to make progress, particularly in Syria. He had, as you know, a lengthy meeting, a series of meetings actually with Foreign Minister Lavrov, and then a very long session with President Putin. And when he came out of there, he was he talked very, very candidly about the things that they discussed and some of the decisions that the two sides made with respect to moving the political process forward in Syria. So he came away encouraged by the dialogue. But he also came away, I think, as you know, mindful that there's still a lot of work to be done. And we don't agree with Russia on everything. But there are areas such as Syria where there is room for progress, and there are common interests that we can continue to pursue. And Russia is not only a member of the ISSG, but a leader inside the ISSG, a co-chair with the United States on the cessation of hostilities, and have themselves signed up to the 3 communiques and the UN Security Council resolution, which calls for a whole unified non-sectarian Syria and a transition process that is Syrian-led to a government that is decided by the Syrian people. So there's lots of work yet to do and lots of dialogue yet to have with Russian officials going forward. And I think it's probably pretty obvious how often and how regularly the Secretary communicates and stays in touch with Foreign Minister Lavrov, and I expect that dialogue and that communication will continue. Sure, go ahead.
Since you mentioned that the talks basically are on pause again now, how do you expect them to proceed? Do you want the Mistura to make this decision, or it's going to be a collective one?
About the talks?
About how to proceed further, when to unpause the talks, when to resume the talks again.
Sure.
Yeah.
So a couple of things there. I mean, we respect Special Envoy de Misture's decision to accept the request by the opposition to pause these talks. And as he said at the time, that all parties had agreed to stay in Geneva, even though the talks were being paused, and that they would sort of revisit things on Friday of this week. So we wait to see how that comes out, and we look forward to hearing where things stand on Friday. We also understand the frustrations expressed by the opposition in terms of pausing it, and specifically their deep concerns about the lack of humanitarian access, getting where it needs to get to, and the continued violations of the cessation by the regime. There was just an attack on a playground in a marketplace just 2 days ago that was horrific in scope and intensity. And that kind of thing is unacceptable. Now, the cessation of hostilities is still in place in many places in Syria, but we recognize from the day it was announced that there were probably going to be violations. But it is, and I've seen criticism today of our view of the cessation of hostilities, and we have always stated that it was going to require a lot of work, and that there were going to be violations that had to be dealt with. Frankly, that's why a task force co-chaired by the United States and Russia was put together to monitor as best we can the cessation of hostilities, because we knew that it was going to be a difficult thing to keep in place at 100%. And of course, it hasn't been 100%. But there's no question that even with the violations, which obviously have been increasing, and we are still concerned about, but there's no question that in many areas of Syria, it's still largely holding, and that life for many Syrians is better now under the cessation, as fragile as it has been, than before the cessation. That's just beyond question. To your question about sort of unpausing it, we're going to wait to see where we are on Friday. We continue to urge all parties to remain committed to the Geneva process and to the resumption of talks, because we'd like to see that get moving again and have some energy. We continue to believe that the only solution in Syria to the civil war is a political one, not a military one, and that's why this process is so important to us. So we're grateful for the leadership and, quite frankly, the skills, the negotiating skills that Special Envoy de Mistura continues to demonstrate in this process. This has to be UN-led, and so it's not, to your specific question, I mean, it's not going to be dictated by the United States or Russia when the next round of talks will be. That's got to be decided by Special Envoy de Mistura and by the parties. We obviously would like to see them resume as soon as possible to some effect. When they got started a couple of weeks ago, Mr. de Mistura said that he really wanted to make sure that the talks included specific discussions about the political process and political transition. And that was a key goal of his. And so we all share the disappointment that we haven't been able to see those kinds of discussion bear specific fruit here in this round. But we'd like to see the rounds resume as soon as possible. As for the ISSG, I do not know when the next meeting of the ISSG is going to be, but Mr. de Mistura alluded to the idea in his press conference a couple of days ago that the ISSG might probably be meeting again in the future, and I would expect that there might be a meeting sometime in the offing here. I just don't know exactly when, but it's important to remember that the ISSG is sort of a coordinating body representing the international community, which now has more than 20 member participants to it. So it is important sort of as a coordinating body, but ultimately the leadership in these talks is and will remain under UN auspices. I'll come back to you, but let me go back here to you, Miss, and then I'm going to take New York.
Hello, Mr. Kerbin. This is Maria for W Radio Colombia.
Yeah.
Even though our people and the U.S. have done huge efforts in the war against drugs, we seem not to be winning because, according to the last report of the Department of State, of the State Department, the levels of production in Colombia are really, really high. And this week at the UN, in the UN meeting, many leaders were proposing to decriminalize some drugs, to be more liberal. What is the United States position on this proposal? Is there the moment? Is it the moment to make a change of strategy in the war against drugs?
The increase that you talk about of particularly of COCA figures for 2015 out of Colombia are definitely concerning to us. There's no question about that. But we do believe that the resolution of the FARC's 52-year insurgency will contribute to the government's ability to address this challenge. We continue to enjoy an excellent law enforcement and security relationship with Colombia, and we would want to note Colombia's strong commitment to fighting narcotics trafficking themselves. Now, you're right, at the UN there was a special session on drugs where the U.S. and Colombia both joined an international consensus in adopting an outcome document that sets out a pragmatic approach to countering drugs with a balance between law enforcement and public health responses. So we're committed to that effort, as we demonstrated there in New York. We're committed to also working bilaterally with Colombia as Colombia continues to work at this tough challenge. But again, I point back to what I said before. I mean, we believe that the peace process itself can and most likely will have a positive effect all by itself. And so we look forward to seeing that process continue and to succeed. Sure.
We hope that too, but what seems to be happening is that even if the FARC goes, there are some other people that will
Sure.
take the business, so maybe it's not the solution.
And I don't mean to convey that it is. We think it'll have a positive effect, but you're absolutely right. It's not going to be the panacea. And we don't believe, if we believe that, we wouldn't have signed on with Colombia at the UN for this outcome document. We recognize that it's still going to be a challenge, but we also recognize that the Colombian government is dedicated to trying to meet that challenge. Part and parcel of that is the peace process. We believe that will have an impact, but nobody's saying it's going to solve all the problems. We're not. We're mindful of that. We're mindful of that. That's a great question. Let me go to New York. Let me go to New York
Paolo
and then
Mastrolilli.
we'll walk around. Go ahead.
Paolo Mastrolilli with the Italian daily La Stampa. Thank you very much for the briefing. The question is about Libya. Now that there is a government of national accord in Tripoli, do you foresee the need of an international intervention to help it stabilize the country? And do you expect European allies like Italy to lead this effort?
Well, I don't. First of all, it's a great question. Thank you. We do support the government of national accord and Prime Minister al-Sarraj's efforts to get governing institutions in place and running to deliver effective governance to the people of Libya, which we believe is the long-term answer there. Now they're ensconced now in Tripoli, and they're starting that important work, and they obviously will continue to have the support of the American people and of this administration as they do that. They also have, as you know, they have the support of so many European leaders. And just this week, I think, there were several foreign ministers from European nations that paid visits down there. We think that's helpful. And their strong statements of support to the government of national accord are important. I wouldn't, at this time, be willing to or able to speculate about, any intervention by foreign security forces or foreign militaries. That's, again, if you're going to support the government of national accord, then you're going to support their efforts to deliver good governance to the Libyan people. And I know of no request by them for that kind of intervention by European or any other foreign militaries. So our focus right now is on the political process and on supporting them in this endeavor as the government of national accord again gets established and makes some progress. That's where our focus is. And again, we welcome the like support by European nations, support that's already been demonstrated very tangibly by these visits this week. Yeah, over here. Go ahead. Yeah, right there in the.
Hi, Jean. Adam Shu from Voice of America Mandarin. Do you have any comment on the report that China suspended a G7 anti-corruption task force early this year? And as a follow-up question, China will hold an anti-corruption forum next week. Do you have any expectation for any results coming out of this forum?
Can you repeat the second question? I'm not sure I got that.
China is holding a anti-corruption forum under the G20 Business Summit framework next week.
Yeah, I've seen those reports. I actually don't have any information on that, and I don't have a reaction to give you from the United States government on that. But there was another part of your question.
The question was about about China suspending a G20 anti-corruption task force.
Right, that's what I mean. I've seen those reports. I don't have anything additional to say right now.
For the forum, the forum China is holding next week.
Yeah, look. I'm not going to lay out specific expectations here from the United States perspective, but broadly speaking, not to this specific forum that you're talking about, but broadly speaking, Secretary Kerry has spoken at length, and he gave a very powerful speech in Davos a couple of months ago about the corrosive impact of corruption around the world, and the degree to which it can help foster extremist ideology, how it can destroy the economic livelihood of citizens, and shake the confidence of so many people in their own government. He firmly believes that corruption is, in fact, a national security issue, not just for countries not just for countries around the world, but for the United States and our interests around the world. So I think you're going to continue to hear more from him on this as time goes on. He is focused very much on that as an issue. So again, I don't have expectations with this particular forum to discuss, but to the degree, again, more broadly, to the degree that other nations are also willing and able to focus on corruption and take it on as the national security issue that it is, that we certainly recognize it is, well, that's a welcome and that's helpful. Okay? Let me go way in the back there. Way, you in the glasses, yeah. Let's give you a shot.
Thank you, John. I appreciate it. I have a question about Eritrea.
Who are you with?
My name is Mesfin Bazu. I'm from TG Ethiopian Television.
Okay.
Human Rights Watch and United Nations Commission of Inquiry on Human Rights in Eritrea released a report about Eritrea's dismissal human rights situation. And also some accused the Eritrean government its involvement to disrupt the peace in Ethiopia and the surrounding region. My question is, John, what is the U.S. current policy towards Eritrea?
Well, I don't have a specific reaction to that report. I think we're still working our way through it ourselves, so I wouldn't have a specific reaction to that. So I'm going to have to take that question and get back to you. But I can say that, again, writ large, and you just saw a few days ago we released our human rights report, which covers nations all around the world, and we've laid bare our human rights concerns. And I would encourage you to get online and look at that. And with respect to questions about Eritrea, you can see it all in there in our report, where we believe the issues are with respect to human rights and the kinds of improvements that we think need to be made. So it's all right there. And we're nothing if not candid about our concerns about human rights all around the world. It's something we take very, very seriously. And that's why we put this report out every year. So, again, haven't seen this report. I know we are working our way through it, and when we're able to get you a specific reaction to it and to its findings, we'll do that. But I would encourage you to go look at what we've said in our human rights report with respect to Eritrea and, frankly, all other nations around the world. Okay? Yep, right here in the red. Yep, or pink. What is that? Pink? Yes. Okay.
Pink, and this is red, I think. So my name is Raquel Sanz. I'm from TV3, the public Catalan television in Barcelona, Spain. I'd like to move to another issue about the territorial reform, which is a pending issue on Europe, especially after the path opened by the Scottish referendum, which the U.S. was pretty vocal when the date of the referendum was getting close. So I'm asking about this issue in the sense of how the U.S. Department or the State Department or the U.S. government, I'd like to know if it's concerned about the fact that the lack of agreement on a territorial reform in Spain right now, specifically on the possibility of a referendum in Catalonia, is one of the main reasons why there's no government, no elected government right now in Spain, and we might go into new elections.
I think our position on this hasn't changed. I mean, these are obviously decisions that the Spanish people have to make, and we respect that. We also value our very strong partnership and relationship with Spain and believe in a strong, unified Spain. But these specific questions are really for the Spanish people to work out amongst themselves.
A quick follow-up, but are you looking into it? I mean, are you concerned about it, about what's going on? Are you
we're certainly monitoring and watching the situation, but we respect the sovereignty of Spain here and the decisions that the Spanish people have to make. Yeah, you go ahead right there.
Yes, thanks. Lu Zhenhua from 21st Century Business Herald, China. Two questions about economic issues. On U.S.-China BIT negotiation, bilateral investment treaty, there was high expectation of exchange of negative list offer by the end of last month when President Xi Jinping visited here during the nuclear summit. So, but it didn't happen. So, is it a timetable for the third exchange of this offer, and what both sides will go in afterwards? Is it still in the schedule for this negotiation? And second is about the global overcapacity of the steel industry. When U.S. put a lot of pressure on China, also EU. There was also reported by Reuters that Japan and South Korea reduces its steel price 1/3 of the original one. So is there a need for a global coordinated policy toward this overcapacity issue? Thanks.
Okay, well, there's a lot there. I really can't on the bilateral investment treaty. I can't really speak to timing. The timing will be driven by the substance. What I can tell you is that concluding the BIT with China remains an important priority for us, absolutely. And the U.S. and China have not yet exchanged, as you noted, revised negative list. As I understand it, the negotiating teams are still coordinating to engage closely to work toward a high standard bilateral investment treaty as agreed to by Presidents Obama and Xi in September of last year. But on timing, I just don't have anything more to say or to add. On the question of steel and overcapacity, this is really something more for our Secretary of Commerce and our trade representative to speak to. But I would point you to what they said yesterday. And if you don't mind, I'll just sort of summarize it here because they said it better than I can. That we're pleased that a number of the economies participating in this week's Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development high-level meeting agreed on a joint statement that presents our shared views on the challenges of excess capacity facing the steel industry and workers and proposes a series of steps to address these challenges. Canada, the European Union, Japan, Mexico, the Republic of Korea, Switzerland, and Turkey have all joined with the United States to support urgent action. It's our shared goal that other economies, including China, will come to recognize the value of these actions and will join our collective effort to address the causes of current excess capacity, the current excess capacity problem affecting not only steel, but also aluminum and cement. And we're going to continue to engage bilaterally, multilaterally with trading partners, including China, to take meaningful action to meet that goal. Okay? Let me, I don't have anybody from New York. How much time do I got? Another 10 minutes. We'll go up here and I'll come back, I promise.
Thank you, sir. My name is Jae-min Son of Gyeongyang Daily News, South Korea. Just like many other countries, North Korea is also sending their delegation to New York the signing ceremony of the Paris
Yeah.
Climate Agreement, and they are sending Foreign Minister Ri Su-yong there, which is taken rare case because nothing much is known about their efforts to counter the climate change. So, what would be your comment on his visit? Do you welcome him, or do you share some kind of concerns that they are trying to dilute their image as isolated, with the strong sanction regime? And second,
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
second question is follow with that. Is there any possibility that Secretary Kerry will meet Foreign Minister Ri Su-yong at the margin of the signing ceremony, or do you rule out any possibility of meeting him, including encounter?
On the second question, there's no expectation that the Secretary will meet with the North Korean Foreign Minister, none. So I don't see that happening. On your first question, look, we continue to judge the North by their actions. Certainly nothing's legally preventing them from coming to the UN to participate in this signing. And as I said at the outset, we want to see nations around the world sign this agreement and then put it into force. It's not just about signing. It's about the actions that go to join and to actually implement. And we talked about how serious China is about this. We want to see other nations be just as serious about it. But look, what's behind their motivations to come, and if they've and their purported intents to sign, they'd have to speak to that. What we want to see out of the North is a concerted effort and a willingness to commit to easy for me to say, denuclearization on the peninsula, and to stop the provocative activity which we continue to see, which does nothing to increase stability or security there on the peninsula. That's what we want to see. And we've said all along, Secretary Kerry said it not long ago, we stand ready to resume the six-party talks process. And the onus is on the North to show that they are ready in word and in deed to actually do that. And they've shown nothing but unwillingness. And every time they conduct a launch or a test of nuclear capabilities, they prove yet again their unwillingness to participate in that process. So denuclearization remains the goal. The six-party talks process remains the venue and the forum that we're committed to. And that's what we want to see out of the North. Okay? Yes, ma'am. You in the blue there. I know that's blue, right? I give my colors.
Thank you very much. Jennifer Chen with Shenzhen Media Group. I just got two basic questions. First, South Korea President Park said Monday that North Korea appeared to preparing for fifth nuclear tests. I just wondered, do you have any discussion with Chinese counterpart? And also, what will be the following possible important bilateral agendas of U.S.-China relations? Thank you.
I think I can get this, but tell me if I'm off. On this, the idea of another test. I mean, we've certainly seen reports of these threats. I wouldn't talk about intelligence matters one way or another from the podium, but I would go back to what I said earlier to this gentleman, that what we want to see, and we continue to urge the North to stop these provocative activities and these destabilizing military initiatives. They're doing nothing for the North Korean people. They're certainly doing nothing to improve stability on the peninsula. We have a treaty alliance with the Republic of Korea that we take very seriously, and we're going to continue to do that. And so is this something that we routinely discuss with China? Absolutely. You know, when the secretary was in Beijing recently, it was a core feature of the discussion with Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and then also they discussed that in New York and in other venues they have in their bilateral discussions. And we, at the time, you know, when we talked about in the wake of the most recent test, the need for a stronger international community action against the North, you know, which led now to a UN resolution that's put in place the strongest sanctions in 2 decades. And China signed up to that. And China showed what we believe to be leadership in that regard, willingness to put those sanctions in place. I'd also note that the resolution calls for tougher enforcement mechanisms than we've had in the past, because part of the problem we've had in the past with previous resolutions has been that the enforcement mechanisms have either not been strong enough or not as carefully and as comprehensively followed and pursued and implemented. And so these resolutions are tougher than they've ever been before. So are the enforcement mechanisms in place. We are going to continue to expect China to exert its influence and its leadership, as it did in the passing of the resolution, to continue to implement it just as aggressively. So, yes, North Korea remains on the agenda of bilateral discussions that we continue to have with China. And we note that China, likewise, is extremely frustrated by what's happening in Pyongyang. As for the other issues on the bilateral agenda, and again, I don't have any bilateral meetings to announce today in terms of Friday. We'll probably have more to say tomorrow about what bilateral discussions may occur with the Secretary. But in general, there's a wide range of issues that we continue to want to and will continue to discuss with Chinese leaders, to include climate change and our cooperation on that, to include issues of maritime security in the South China Sea, to include our continued concerns over cybersecurity issues. There's a wide agenda of things to talk about. And look, not unlike with Russia, where we don't see eye to eye on everything, there are issues where the U.S. and China can agree. You know, I mentioned climate change, but Syria is another issue, you know, where China has been helpful in terms of helping move the political process forward. They're a member of the ISSG, and they have taken those responsibilities seriously. So very, very diverse agenda, which I expect will continue and will continue to be robust going forward. What I said was tomorrow I'll have a better sense of what bilateral meetings the Secretary might have. Well, he will have some bilateral meetings in New York on Friday, and we'll be in a better position tomorrow to announce what those meetings are and who they're with. I got time for just a couple more. Colombia, I already talked about Colombia. How about you in the glasses right there in the middle?
Hi, thanks, John. Justin with the Yomiuri Shimbun. Just to quickly follow up on the question of sanctions, what happens next when North Korea detonates a nuke? And secondly, Reuters put out a report early this morning saying that remittances might be at risk. Remittances to North Korea may be at risk if North Korea detonates their next nuclear test. Why was that not considered in this recent round of sanctions?
Well, so I'm really bad at predicting the future, and I don't think I'm going to start today. Obviously, we don't want to see another test. We don't want to see any more provocative behavior out of the North. But if we do, we'll consult with the international community, and we'll raise it with the UN as we have in the past. So I don't want to try to prejudge outcomes here, but. The North's actions are getting increasing scrutiny by the international community, and as I said, this last round, these last round of sanctions are the most significant in 2 decades, with a tougher enforcement mechanism. And you really saw the international community come together and sort of coalesce around that most recent dangerous test. So there's the international community's galvanized here with respect to the North. And again, can't predict what would happen in the future, but I can tell you this, that we're not going to take, the United States isn't going to take our eye off this. And we're not going to be bashful about trying to lead and to move the international community forward if they continue these kinds of destabilizing activities. As for remittances, I've seen the press report. I really don't have anything specific to say with respect to the degree to which that was or wasn't discussed in the last round, or the degree at which it would play in the future. I think the point, though, that was made by some of the people quoted in that article, and the point in general is that that we take these threats very seriously. When they just claim they're going to do something, we take it at face value. It matters to us, and just as critically, we know it matters a heck of a lot to the people there in the region and to our allies in South Korea. So we have to take this stuff seriously, and we do. That is why we're going to continue to work closely with the international community and the UN going forward, if they do. But it's also why we take our alliance commitments and our defensive and security commitments on the peninsula so seriously. And we talked about the fact that there's consultations going on now about the THAAD system. Those consultations wouldn't have had to occur if the North didn't continue to provoke the way they have been. So it's a long answer. Again, I won't speculate about the future. I can just tell you, it's a good opportunity for me to reaffirm our strong commitment to our security obligations there on the peninsula and more broadly in the international community. Okay, I'm going to take one more back there, the scarf. Yep.
Thank you. My name is Mi Kyung-kim with the Seoul Shinmun Daily Korea. Secretary Kerry visited Hiroshima.
Yes.
And there are some pro and cons opinion about it. And I'm wondering what kind of assessment or feedback you have exchanged with the White House, which might influence President Obama to decide whether to go to Hiroshima next month. Thank you.
I think I would point you to how the Secretary reacted publicly after he visited the museum there and the Peace Park. And he said it was gut-wrenching, and it was very powerful. I had a chance to be with him as he walked through the museum, and I certainly would echo those sentiments. It's hard to come away from that without a sense of deeper understanding about the destruction wrought there and about the suffering. I won't speak for conversations he had privately after that experience, and I certainly won't speak for the president or the president's travel schedule going forward. As the Secretary noted, there are many factors that play into the president's traveling agenda, where he goes and what he does, and I'd let my colleagues at the White House speak to that. I simply wouldn't speculate. But it was the Secretary believed important to go, important to see it, and important after to talk about what he saw and how it impacted him, how it impacted everybody, quite frankly. So it was an important, significant day, and the Secretary was very proud to be a participant in it. And he was also, I might add, very grateful for the hospitality that was shown by our Japanese hosts. There it was in addition to the personal experience of seeing the museum and laying the wreath, it was also a very important meeting, a G7 meeting that covered a lot of very, very important issues, not just in the region, but around the world: Syria, Libya, Yemen, climate change, Iraq, what's going on against Daesh, Afghanistan. If you look at just the list of things that the G7 ministers discussed. It was very clear that it was a very productive set of meetings. I'll take the last one from New York, and then I think we're going to have to call it quits here today. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Camille Shikoya from the Africa Bazaar magazine. My question is in regard to Ambassador Power travel to Africa this week. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And also, there's a news report that President Derby of our Chad indicated that it won't help in the U.S.-backed effort to install a new unity government in Libya.
In Libya?
Yeah.
In Libya. Well, I would point you to my colleagues at the UN to speak with greater specificity to Ambassador Power's visit. I'm afraid I don't have the list in front of me of everywhere she's going and what she's doing. As you know, she travels quite a bit. We have a lot of national security interests in Africa throughout the continent, and I'm sure that that her visit is actually in support of all of those. I just don't have a list of where she's going. We can get that for you, though. As for Libya, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, the Secretary of the United States government remains fully committed to supporting the government of national accord there. We believe that the long-term answer for the Libyan people is, as it is and so elsewhere around the world, good governance and a strong political process, one that's responsive to them and to their needs. And that's why we support the government of national accord and their efforts now, as they're established in Tripoli, to get the institutions and the levers and the strings, the muscle and sinew of government stood up, established, and running. And they will continue to have our support as they do that. But, you know, we're mindful of the growing threat of extremism there. And as we've said with respect to Iraq and the threat of Daesh, with respect to Syria and the threat of Daesh and al-Nusra and there. And frankly, as we've said in other places like Afghanistan, which continues to face acts of terror committed now, you know, by the Taliban. Good governance, strong, competent governance, is the best antidote, the best and most sustainable antidote to that kind of extremism and the kinds of insecure conditions that extremism creates. And so, again, we fully support the government of national accord and will continue to do that. And as I said earlier, we welcomed news that several European foreign ministers made the trip to Libya to show their support and to demonstrate very tangibly what they're willing to do to continue to support the government of national accord. I apologize I don't have more information about Ambassador Power's travels. I should have come prepared for that, but we'll make sure we get you something directly shortly after this briefing. Thanks very much for having me. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun, and I look forward to coming back again soon. We'll see you. Bye-bye. Thank you.